Hello, all, and welcome to another episode of the Market Pulse presented by Smart Touch. I am your host, Aaron Fichera, and today I have a special guest with us, Abby Massey of TaxTakers. Abby, welcome.
Hi, Aaron. Good morning. Good to be here.
Um, is on everyone's mind. We're just getting over the 2023 tax season, and franchise tax quarterlies are going to be coming up. So um, everybody wants to know about taxes, or at least how to make them less painful. So, Abby, in your role as VP of Energy Incentives at TaxTakers, I always like to start us off with first, how'd you get involved in the industry? And the larger question, how does someone get excited about becoming a tax consultant?
Sure, that's a great question, and I get it often. So, just to give you a little bit of my background, I'm a professional engineer. I started my career in building design. So, I was a structural engineer working at an all disciplines architecture firm. And that's really where I have a lot of passion for buildings, real estate, energy efficiency, things of that nature. A recruiter actually found me about 7 years into my career and told me about this position to do tax consulting. At first, I thought he was crazy because obviously that's not something I'd ever thought of as a career path for myself. But there are very specialty niche tax incentives that are available for building owners and designers who are implementing energy efficient types of designs. And so that's where my background comes into play. I can help translate all of the industry knowledge in these very technical incentives and then help CPAs apply for those on their returns.
That's awesome. Just because in a previous episodes, we talked about energy incentives, and one crux for a lot of people to get over is just the cost. You know,
Sure.
people want to be sustainable, eco-friendly, but then it gets down to, well, how much is it going to cost? How much is it going to impact the bottom line? Um, and that, in my experience, seems to be the deterrent. However, maybe it's around asking the question, how do we create sustainable profit through sustainability? And one of the levers is being taxes. So that's why, there's very few levers that we can pull, and one of them is being those incentives. So I do want us to jump right into the crux of today's conversation. And Abby, to kick us off, what are just some federal or state tax incentives that are currently available for builders or developers um, that just focus on sustainable or green energy projects?
Sure. That's a great question, Aaron. So there are quite a few energy incentives available, especially since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in 2022. So some of these programs were available before, but now they've been enhanced to bring extra value to folks who are charging forward on some of the energy efficient type projects or installing renewable property. So there's a couple of incentives I have in mind for this particular call. The first is Section 179D, which is the energy efficient commercial buildings deduction. And so this program is available for commercial or high rise residential projects. And high rise residential is 4 stories or above. Commercial can be any size though. It's up to $5 per square foot if you install energy efficient HVAC, interior lighting, and building envelope systems. So this can be new construction or renovation projects, and building owners and designers of government or nonprofit projects can qualify. So a lot of folks can potentially benefit from that program. The second
And
program I have in mind is the Section 45L program. It's the sisters to 179D. And so Section 45L is a credit. It's available for multifamily type projects, specifically for developers and constructors who are going to lease or rent the property. This went on under a major overhaul from the Inflation Reduction Act. So now, to qualify for the first tier, you need to get your dwelling units Energy Star certified. And if you do, you can receive up to 2,500 per dwelling unit. So as you can imagine, some of these large multifamily type projects
Mhm.
can really stack up. If you're to go to a further For the Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready Home Program certification, you can actually get up to $5,000 per dwelling unit. So a lot of
Really?
value. Yes.
Well, and I know you touched on multifamily, and some of our listeners, and developers go into build to rent or kind of some leasing properties. Could any of these credits extend to single family um, leasing or dwellings as well?
Yes, absolutely. 45L can work for single family homes if they're going to be rented, leased, or sold.
Wonderful.
Yes.
All right. So there's some interesting stuff that's coming out of it. y- when you going back to kind of the energy efficient for commercial buildings and high rises, are you seeing more and more taking advantage of these credits, or do they just are they left unused? And how do we get kind of, developers understanding of these incentives?
From my experience, these credits are in some cases not actually being utilized. And a lot of it is just knowledge and education. Many building owners don't even know that these exist, or if they do, they really don't know even how to pursue them. So for the Section 179D program, I see designers actually claiming these the most. So again, that's designers of public buildings or nonprofit projects where they can actually claim it on behalf of the building owner.
Mhm.
Um, Building owners that pay taxes and make these types of energy efficient designs and implement them, they're not quite as aware. So I think the big thing right now is getting the education and awareness out there and helping building owners understand that there are companies like ours that specialize in this and can help them walk through the process so that they can claim the benefit.
And, some of these credits, are they just extending for the duration of the 2024 tax period, or is there a longevity on some of these?
That's another question I get quite often and an important question. Most of these programs are permanent parts of the tax code, which is great. So, Section 179D specifically, it's been around since the Energy Policy Act of 2005.
Mhm.
Again, that kind of tells you not a lot of people used it before the Inflation Reduction Act, and now it's getting a lot more traction because of the increased value. The good news is the rules from the Inflation Reduction Act are going to be in place through the end of 2032. So we've got a good 10 years with the increased value. And then after that, we'll see how the policy and legislation maybe changes the value. It could increase, it could decrease. We'll wait to see when that comes along. But right now, we've got up to $5 per square foot for the next 10 years.
Well, that's something to, yeah. If you're already projecting for 10 years, you might as well, if you're going to maximize that program, get started now rather than, 5 years down the line when you've just missed those, realized savings.
That's right. I think the other important thing to note is Section 179D used to be a one-time shot. So if you reach the maximum deduction in a project, essentially for the lifespan of that building, you have claimed it and you could no longer claim it. Another change from the Inflation Reduction Act is that it resets. So now essentially every fourth year, you can do another large energy efficient type improvement project, or of course, start with a new construction and then future improvements and still claim benefit. So if you start now as a building owner, you can get on a cycle where you're making continual improvements that are needed for the building and claim value.
It, and for these kind of energy incentives, do you find that 4-year cycle is very common, or, does it just differ based on the program and you kind of have to just maximize what's in front of you?
It depends. So for some building owners, maybe they have an outdated building that has a lot of CapEx type project work that needs to happen, but a small budget. What they can do now is schedule maybe larger projects on a 4-year lifespan and not have to feel like they have to tackle everything in one shot and still capture benefit. Newer buildings, I don't think that they're going to need a whole lot of work in that first 4 years, but to know that that schedule's there and maybe plan an improvement type project in the 8 years or 12 years, however they like to do it, they may know then that they're able to capture that value after that original construction.
Excellent. And one particular issue, and I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, is more around investment. in the investment in the properties, we're kind of entering into a cycle where, okay, we have a little bit of higher occupancy. Now's the time to kind of invest in modernization of your corridors, your MEP infrastructure, your elevator modernization, your lobbies, or just adaptive reuse or reuse of how do we convert some projects over. So as we're kind of entering this phase, and I think, as we progress through 2024, 2025, there's going to be a lot more, um, I guess, deals to be had in order to kind of recoup some of these losses. What should we be thinking about in the investment phase? Are there any incentives um, to be, ultimately to be at the forefront as you're looking to capital raise or, modernize?
Yes, I think there's quite a lot to look at in the investment phase. These incentives, especially with the new rules from the Inflation Reduction Act, actually require a lot of planning in the project. So it's important that early on you start talking about estimates for the value. Some of these incentives, like Energy Star section, or excuse me, 45L, Section 179D, or even the investment tax credit for renewable property, could require prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements be met to maximize value. So the sooner what you want to pursue on the project, if you want to include those prevailing wages to maximize the benefit, you can be talking back to the investors, okay, we're planning to implement these types of things on our project, which means we'll be able to capture this kind of value at the backside of the project. Included in the federal incentives are state and local incentives, utility rebates. There's even some grant programs available. So being able to look at the full portfolio of incentives available, many of them work very nicely together so you can stack up the benefit and talk with your investors means hopefully, one, you can keep these energy efficient type improvements and equipment in the project, and two, get over some of the budget issues and challenges quicker, knowing that you're going to receive some of this benefit after the project's complete.
That's excellent. And, kind of in touching on one of your points, I mean, Texas is, if not at the forefront, or one of the leaders when it comes to energy tax credits. Are any recommendations to kind of discover or investigate when it comes to some of these tax credits, maybe in geothermal or solar panels?
The investment tax credit, which is also a part of the Inflation Reduction Act, is a great program. So, if your system is under 1 megawatt of energy generation or less, and that can be for a solar panel system, wind energy, geothermal heat pumps that are heating or cooling the system. We've even got thermal storage or combined heat and power. There's a list of equipment that's eligible. But under that 1 megawatt of generation or less, you get a base credit of 30%. And that's 30% tax credit back on what you're spending on these systems. Now, to make the deal even sweeter, there's some add on credit. So if your equipment's domestically manufactured, you can actually get up to 10% on addition to that 30%. Or if it's serving low income communities, you can get up to 10 or 20%. So with the add on credits in a perfect project, you can get up to 70% of your investment back, which is crazy. Now, one other awesome part about this program and a couple of the other incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's something called elective pay. And elective pay allows government and nonprofit entities to capture the benefit of these tax credits when normally they would not be able to, right? Because they're not taxable entities. Now, through elective pay, they can implement a project. Let's say they're going to install solar panels on their building.
Mhm.
They can do the calculation just like they would for a normal credit, get it pre-registered with the IRS, and then apply for it on a faux return, which would then result in them getting a check in the mail for the amount of the credit. So a really awesome way to even incentivize building owners that don't pay taxes.
Wow. Uh, just sorry, my head is swimming with ideas, but I mean, great
Sure.
ideas. No, but I mean, I can only imagine you live in this world of the tax complexities and just I mean, just that alone, gold nuggets everywhere. So, um, well, One of the questions is where do you see some of the major hurdles? In the planning phase when kind of builders, developers, building owners, clients come to you, Abby, what are some of the hurdles that you see them facing or obstacles um, that are common?
So, some of the obstacles that I see when I'm talking with prospective clients looking into the incentives, number one, these are incentives that happen after the project is completed, right? So, funding is going to come after the project is complete. I have clients there who need funding upfront. And so that's where we might help them look into some of the grant programs, some of the loan programs that might be available to help getting funding upfront prior to being able to get these tax incentives on the backside. Another challenge that we see is the rules are complex. So, some of my prospective clients that I speak to, organizations that I speak to, have done a ton of research, right? They've learned a lot about these incentives and quickly get overwhelmed by the amount of rules that they must follow, by the idea that the IRS is consistently publishing more guidance that helps us as practitioners know exactly how to follow these rules. And so I do find myself often providing comfort in that, helping them to understand that we have the expertise and can handhold them through the whole project so that they don't have to worry about all these nuanced rules. That's really our job in calculating these incentives on their behalf. But it
I
is a challenge. I totally understand. The tax code is a complex world.
No, I mean the IRS, they make everything simple. And I'm
That's
being
right.
extremely facetious in that. Sorry. I'm still burned from this tax season, but I'll get over it until next year. So,
That's right.
well, uh, that's the past. Let's look to the future. So, from your perspective, we talked a little bit about some of these incentives kind of sticking around for 10 years. I mean, is this going to be a one stop, hey, this is it, we're now plug and play for the rest of the 10 years? What kind of trends or changes are you foreseeing in that time period? We do have programs that you've kind of explained are going to be lasting for that time period or beyond, but what's in the works, or what things should we be more mindful of as we progress?
Sure. So I think that, with the 10-year window, it gives the government an opportunity to see how successful this program is. If it is doing what's intended, which I believe the intention, right, is to motivate American building owners, developers, designers to push forward these energy efficient projects. I think in the next few years, we're going to see more cities and states implementing guidelines, laws for compliance in energy efficiency as we all charge towards net zero targets.
Mhm.
And so, if these do their job in implementing those projects, but there's more work to be done after this 10 years, I do think you'll see a continuation of a lot of these tax credits and incentives to continue incentivizing building owners to hit those net zero targets. So, I think that's something interesting. The nice thing, too, about these types of tax incentives is they're often bipartisan supported, right? On one hand, you have that they're a tax break. On the other hand, you have that they're supporting net zero, green energy, sustainability. So they're often used as tools in legislation and government to push forward initiatives. And I think that we'll see that in the next 10 years. So it's going to be interesting as to how they change. But like I said before, some of these are permanent fixtures of the tax code. So they'll
Mhm.
always be around. The value and the mechanism for how they work, though, could update.
Would you see any trends happening here in Texas or on the local level that it's kind of encouraging or to be mindful of?
Sure. So I think even in Texas, we see a lot of the utility companies coming out with rebate programs that can be really beneficial. And so they're kind of in that same boat where if these programs are driving forward these energy efficient projects or seeing them being successfully used, I think those will stay in place. And you might even see other programs come through. One of the programs that I have in mind is from the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a whole home energy type incentive that, yes, was passed on the federal level, but the state offices, energy offices, will be the ones to implement it. And so, Texas, being a state that is pushing forward with some of these types of incentives, should grab onto that type of incentive and make it available to even homeowners. So, I think there's just a lot of opportunity for anyone, commercial or residential, to benefit from certain programs.
And you talked about the whole home program, just high level. What does that involve? Are there any requirements and what are some benefits?
Yes, so like I said, it was rolled out from the Inflation Reduction Act. But the idea is that each state's energy office is the one to implement it. So they'll be setting guidelines probably
Ah,
in this next year as to exactly how compliance should look.
hmm.
But the funding will come from the federal level and it will all be centered around energy efficiency. So it might be measured for greenhouse gas emissions, lower utility costs. That will still be determined by Texas. But this is really the year that they'll be planning and putting out those guidelines.
So if anything, for those that are listening, this is the year to kind of make your voice be heard to some of the legislation locally about how to use this federal program and money.
Absolutely. Yes. If you've got a lot of opinions on what types of incentives or energy efficiency improvements should tie into these incentives, talk to your state energy office. They are building out these programs, and every state have the option to opt in or out of this program. So there is lists online as to which states are complying and which aren't. So if for whatever reason somebody's listening that's outside of Texas, there could be the opportunity for them as well.
Okay, well, good. Well, Abby, I know as we're kind of winding down, ultimately, what are some final thoughts or takeaways you'd like to leave the audience regarding the utilization of tax incentives, and what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Sure. So when it comes to tax incentives, like I said, education is key. Find a trusted resource, a partner who can help you learn about these incentives, what might be available for you as a building owner, as a designer, as a developer, and keep them as a part of your project team. We're working a lot more with designers almost as a subcontracting arm and consultant on projects. So, having a resource like that, watching webinars, the Department of Energy publishes webinars, the USGBC publishes webinars. Learning about these programs is the most important. That's how you know what you can capture, and having a resource you can ask questions for is great. If you'd like a tax consultant, you already have a project in mind, or maybe you placed one in service last year or prior years, you can reach us at www.taxtaker.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and post frequently about updates from the IRS or just tidbits about the programs that I think would be helpful for an audience looking into them. So feel free to follow me there.
Abby, I appreciate you being an invaluable resource. This was a very insightful and educating show. So I appreciate you being a wonderful guest, and I hope to have you back on to talk us through or at least be the Sherpa through these tax codes.
Yeah, absolutely, Aaron. I'm really glad that we could make this happen. Would love to join again. Anything I can do to help folks pursue these incentives is really my mission.
Love it. And for those that are listening, thank you again for spending your time. We look forward to catching you next time on the Market Pulse. Have a great day.